I used to think love was the one place money didn't matter. I know better now. I'm telling this from a distance after the silence, after the leaving, because, if I speak from where I was back then, I might still try to justify things that nearly cost me my dignity. At the time, it didn't feel like I was losing myself. It felt like I was being patient, understanding, mature. That's what I told myself whenever something didn't sit right. Allah walked into my life like she owned the air around her. She didn't rush, didn't explain, didn't ask for permission. Confidence followed her the way shadows follow light. She wore wealth casually, designer bags like afterthoughts, luxury cars like tools, connections like currency. People leaned in when she spoke. Doors opened before she reached them. I was different. I planned. I saved. I showed up early. I listened more than I talked. My power was consistency, not spectacle. When we were together, it felt like two different worlds, overlapping, hers loud and shining, mine quiet and steady. I thought balance was possible, but money has a way of choosing sides without announcing it. We never discussed where we'd eat. She chose. We never debated weekends. She decided. The places we went were always familiar to her, filled with people who knew her name, her story, her status. I smiled, shook hands, learned quickly. I told myself this was compromise. I told myself love meant adapting. The rules were never spoken out loud at first. They didn't have to be. They lived in tone, timing, expectation. When I adjusted my life to fit hers, it was appreciated. When I asked for the same, it was inconvenient. One night, casually, almost playfully, she said she didn't believe in limits. Relationships, she explained, shouldn't feel like cages. Freedom mattered. Independence mattered. I nodded, trying to understand her world. Then she smiled and added, just as lightly, that loyalty was important, that she expected it from me. I laughed too, because it sounded like a joke. It wasn't. She waved off exclusivity for herself like an outdated idea, something small people needed for security. But when it came to me, her eyes sharpened. Of course I wouldn't see anyone else. Of course I'd stay committed. That was different. I didn't argue, I didn't protest. I told myself love sometimes asks for patience. That night, as I watched her speak effortlessly to people who lived in her world, I felt something shift. Love, I realized, was already being measured not in trust, but in currency, and I was losing the exchange. At first, Isla didn't hide anything. She never needed to. She spoke about other men, the way people talk about weather, casual, unimportant, unavoidable. Over coffee, she'd scroll through her phone and mention a dinner she had the night before. Investor thing, she'd say, networking. Another time, adjusting her watch, she smiled and added, I'm meeting someone new tonight. Nothing serious. I just don't like feeling restricted. I learned quickly how to respond. I kept my face neutral. I asked polite questions I didn't want answers to. Silence became my language, because every time I hesitated, she noticed. You're not jealous, are you? She asked once, amused rather than concerned. No, I said, too quickly. Good, she replied. I like that about you. You're different. You understand. That sentence followed me everywhere. You're different. You should understand. It sounded like praise, but it functioned like a leash. Any discomfort I felt became proof that I was failing to be the man she admired, so I swallowed it. My loyalty, on the other hand, was never optional. It was praised when I complied and questioned when I didn't. If I mentioned a female colleague, her tone shifted. Why does she need to text you? It's work, I said. MMH. She replied, unconvinced. Still, boundaries matter. Boundaries. The word tasted strange coming from her. When I assured her there was nothing to worry about, she smiled, satisfied. I respect that. It shows gratitude. You know how rare loyalty is. Gratitude for what? Her time? Her lifestyle? Her choosing me. I started editing myself before speaking. I stopped replying to old friends as quickly. I avoided situations that might raise questions. I told myself this was compromise, that relationships required sacrifice. Still, late at night, doubt crept in quietly. Was love supposed to feel like this? Like proving something over and over? Like silence was the cost of peace? One evening, after I mentioned a harmless conversation with a woman from work, Ayla's patience thinned. I don't like that, she said plainly. I don't talk to you about every man I meet, but you know I have my reasons. You don't need those conversations. I waited for her to soften it. She didn't. So let's be clear, she continued. I expect you not to talk to other women. Not like that. If you respect me, this won't be a problem. The room felt smaller. I looked at her confident, certain, unmoved and nodded. Okay, I said. The words settled heavily in my chest. I knew, even then, that something in me had just gone quiet. Ayla started calling it honesty, as if naming the wound made it heal faster. She said she didn't believe in secrets, and I learned what that meant in practice. She told me everything, where she was going, who she was meeting, how long she'd be out. Each detail landed softly but stayed sharp. I'm having dinner with Marcus, she said one evening, standing in front of the mirror. You'd like him. He's interesting. I nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed, pretending to focus on my phone. The reflection showed more than I wanted to see. She moved with ease, choosing outfits like decisions didn't matter. A dress I'd never seen before, heels too elegant for a casual meal. She sprayed perfume slow, deliberate, then turned, smiling. It's just dinner, she added, as if that erased the image already burned into me. I learned her rituals without meaning to, the way she took longer getting ready when it wasn't for me. The scent that lingered in the room after she left, the sound of the door closing behind her, clean and final. I stayed behind, surrounded by quiet that felt earned, like a punishment for not being enough. When she came home late, I was always awake. She never asked why. Sometimes she'd drop her bag and say, "It went well," like she was reporting a meeting. Other times, she said nothing at all. I stopped asking questions, because answers hurt more than ignorance. My silence wasn't strength, it was confinement. Every unspoken thought pressed against my chest until breathing felt deliberate. I stopped reaching out to friends. I skipped gatherings. When they asked what was wrong, I said I was busy. It was easier than explaining a pain that had no visible bruise. One night, a friend studied me for too long and said, "You don't look like yourself." I smiled, just tired. The truth was heavier. I was shrinking to fit a space that kept tightening. That evening, Allah didn't dress up at home. She typed on her phone.com, detached. Then it buzzed in my hand a few minutes later. "I won't be home tonight." No explanation, no apology, just a statement. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My fingers hovered, ready to respond, to ask something, to say anything that might anchor me. Instead, I set the phone down. For the first time, I didn't reply. In that silence, something fractured, not loudly, not all at once, but enough that I knew I wouldn't come back the same. When I stopped reacting the way she expected, Isla noticed.com unsettled her more than anger ever could. She began to watch me closely, as if silence were a flaw she needed to correct. "You're too quiet lately," she said one afternoon, almost laughing. "It's strange. Real men speak up." I didn't respond. I was learning that every word I offered could be turned against me. She leaned back, studying me. "You know," she continued, "if you were confident, none of this would hurt you. Secure people don't feel threatened by freedom." There it was, again, my pain reframed as weakness. The problem was never her actions, only my reaction to them. I wondered how many times I'd accepted that version of reality just to keep things smooth. Whenever I tried to express discomfort, she reminded me of everything she provided. The apartment we stayed in, the trips we took, the ease of a life I hadn't built but was allowed to occupy. "I give you stability," she said once. Not unkindly. Most people would be grateful. Grateful. The word returned like a debt I could never finish paying. I started to see the pattern clearly. Love wasn't something we shared anymore, was something I complied with. My value was measured by how little I asked for and how much I tolerated. The more I adjusted, the more she expected adjustment to be permanent. At night, alone with my thoughts, I argued with myself. Walking away meant losing comfort, certainty, a life that looked impressive from the outside. Staying meant something worse, watching my self-respect erode quietly until there was nothing left to defend. I asked myself hard questions I'd avoided for months. Was dignity worth discomfort? Was dependence just another form of fear dressed up as loyalty? The answers didn't come easily, but they came honestly. One evening, after I declined an invitation she suggested I should be excited about, her patience finally cracked. "You know," she said sharply, "you're not irreplaceable. People line up for this life." The words were meant to scare me, to remind me of my position, to make me small again. Instead, they landed differently. I realized she was right, just not in the way she intended. I was already replaceable to her. My presence was conditional. My silence was expected. My loyalty was assumed, never earned. Standing there, listening to her say it out loud, something settled in me with frightening clarity. If staying meant disappearing piece by piece, then walking away wasn't loss. It was the only way to stop being replaced. I used to think explaining everything would keep the peace. Every worry, every hurt, every question I had about her actions, I shared them carefully, measured, hoping clarity would fix the cracks. But clarity never fixed anything. It only made me more visible to her judgment, more vulnerable to her manipulation. The moment I stopped explaining, everything shifted. I stopped justifying my feelings. I stopped asking why she left late or why she laughed a little too easily with someone else. I stopped defending the silence I carried in my chest like a stone. At first, it was small, shorter answers, fewer questions. Then it became absolute. I became a closed book. Isla noticed almost immediately. Her confidence flickered when my voice no longer offered her access. She leaned forward one evening, trying to read my expression. "You're distant," she said, with a teasing edge that usually demanded a reaction. I said nothing. "You've changed, sharper now. Is someone else occupying your attention?" "No one," I answered finally, calm but immovable. She tried again, casually dropping names and subtle hints meant to provoke jealousy, to pull me back into the game she controlled so easily. I listened, but the familiar surge of hurt and confusion that usually followed didn't come. The cage she had built around me was still there, but I was no longer rattling its bars. Instead, I reconnected with myself. My mornings returned to routines I had abandoned, work projects that had been waiting, runs I had skipped, books I had promised myself I'd read. Discipline became a quiet rebellion, clarity a shield. I realized how much of me had been surrendered to her, my thoughts, my time, my emotional energy. Slowly, I took them back. One night, after she texted about meeting someone for dinner, she followed with a demand disguised as concern. "You'll tell me you're okay, won't you?" I didn't reply. She read the silence, her thumb hovering over the keyboard, her carefully maintained control faltering. Power had always been hers in our relationship, flowing through her wealth, her freedom, her unpredictability. But now, in the quiet, in my refusal to react or explain, it shifted. For the first time, I felt that the subtle, dangerous, liberating shift where the person who had been held captive by love suddenly held themselves. And in that silence, I understood that nothing would ever feel the same again. For weeks, Allah had been chasing reactions, trying to provoke jealousy, trying to make me bend, trying to pull me back into the rhythm she had always controlled. But this time, she felt the difference before I even spoke a word. My energy had shifted. My attention no longer hung on her every move. My time was mine again, my thoughts my own. She noticed it immediately. The subtle distance, the way I no longer waited by my phone, the quiet certainty in my gaze, the way I no longer flinched at her name or messages. She tried to fill it with questions, with playful touches, with conversations meant to reel me in. "Why are you so quiet?" she asked one evening, her voice lighter than usual, but the edge of worry was there. "Are you upset with me?" I looked at her calmly, holding my own ground. I didn't shout, I didn't plead, I didn't explain. "I'm not upset," I said simply. That unsettled her more than anger ever could. She pressed on, trying to assert the familiarity she had always taken for granted. "Then tell me you're okay. Reassure me. I need to hear it." I shook my head gently. I can't reassure someone who doesn't respect me." The words landed between us like a weight she hadn't anticipated. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty there, the kind of uncertainty that comes when control is stripped away. She had always been the one to set the rules, to shape reactions, to determine the rhythm of everything between us. But now, her usual tools, the teasing, the charm, the implied dominance, felt powerless. "You what?" she stammered, disbelief threading through her voice. She searched my face for signs of weakness, for a crack she could exploit, for an apology or explanation that never came. I didn't give her any. I just held the calm I had spent weeks building, the clarity I had been reclaiming from her manipulation. "I can't love someone who doesn't respect me," I repeated. No drama, no threat, just truth. She blinked, momentarily speechless, and I could feel her panic simmering beneath the surface. The realization was dawning on her. This wasn't a fight she could win, a hurt she could provoke, or a mistake she could charm her way out of. The man she had assumed would always be there, always bending, always explaining, was no longer in that space. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw the fear, the panic of someone who had always believed they were untouchable, finally confronted with the consequences of their own actions. The man she thought she owned was gone. The decision didn't come with speeches, tears, or ultimatums. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, and I didn't make promises I knew I couldn't keep. I simply prepared to leave, quietly, deliberately, without giving Ayla the satisfaction of drama. It was the first time I felt in control, not through manipulation, but through the clarity of knowing my worth. Packing my things, I moved calmly through the apartment we had shared. Each item I picked up felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had surrendered long ago. Books I hadn't read, clothes I hadn't worn, personal things that had quietly been overshadowed by her life. I didn't linger, didn't leave notes, didn't create spectacle. It was enough to leave the room and leave her without turning back. When she saw me gathering my things, there was no anger, no pleading, just the faintest flicker of disbelief. She had grown accustomed to compliance, to silent compromise, to the quiet endurance I had offered without complaint. Now, she watched as her power slipped through her fingers, and I didn't flinch. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, trying to mask the panic under casual curiosity. "Yes," I said simply. No explanation, no debate. She tried once more, offering what she had assumed would keep me tethered, a financial gesture, an escape from the uncertainty I would face. "I can set up everything for you. You don't have to worry," she said. I shook my head. "I don't want it." Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching for signs of weakness. There were none to find. The man she thought she could control was moving forward with his own choices, entirely free of her influence. Our final interaction was brief, cold, respectful. I nodded, acknowledged her presence, and stepped toward the door. She didn't follow. She didn't call after me. She just watched, realizing too late that the rules she had enforced for months no longer applied. I felt the familiar ache of loss, the subtle pull of regret, but it was tempered by an unexpected clarity. I was leaving behind comfort, familiarity, and the illusion of security, but I was reclaiming something far more precious, myself. Outside, the city stretched endlessly ahead, indifferent to my story, indifferent to her absence. And yet, in that indifference, I found freedom. I stepped into uncertainty with dignity, my pace steady, my heart firm. Loss hurts. But in that moment, I understood something essential. Staying submitting to rules that weren't meant for me. Trading self-respect for approval would have hurt far more. And that realization made every step forward feel lighter, stronger, irrevocable. I want to speak to you directly, not as a storyteller, but as someone who has walked a path you might recognize all too well. I was loyal, I was patient, I adapted, accommodated, excused, and explained. I stayed quiet when it hurt, stayed calm when it was difficult, and gave more than I ever received. And I learned something vital. Loyalty without boundaries is not love, it's permission to be disrespected. Love without limits invites betrayal. It doesn't matter how much you give, how much you compromise, how much you bend. If the other person has no respect for the rules that apply to them and expects compliance from you, it is not love, it is control. I gave her trust, devotion, time, and patience, and she gave freedom for herself but demanded silence from me. The imbalance was clear, but my heart kept hoping it could be different. That hope nearly cost me my soul. Money doesn't excuse betrayal. Isla's wealth bought privileges, admiration, and influence. It bought social circles and comfort that I couldn't compete with, and yet, none of it excused the way she treated me, or the way she assumed loyalty while giving herself absolute freedom. Wealth can open doors, but it can't buy dignity, decency, or genuine love. The richer she became, the more my sense of value was challenged, but I realized that my worth was tied to her world, or to anyone else's. It was inherent, and it demanded protection. Silence can be strength. There's power in restraint, in choosing not to argue, not to justify, not to fight battles that aren't yours to fight. When I stopped explaining myself, stopped defending the indefensible, the balance shifted. For the first time, I controlled my narrative. For the first time, the emotional leash she had held so tightly snapped, not with confrontation, not with drama, but with calm, deliberate refusal to comply with injustice. I acknowledged the pain, the longing, the ache of leaving something familiar and comfortable. It hurt to walk away. It hurt to surrender the security of wealth, the facade of a life that looked perfect on the outside. But the pain of staying, of losing myself, of surrendering my dignity quietly, slowly, piece by piece, would have been far worse. Leaving was not escape. Leaving was survival. And here is the truth I need you to hear. You are not obligated to stay in relationships that diminish you. In situations where loyalty is demanded, but not reciprocated, where respect is optional and love is conditional. Walking away isn't failure, it's courage. It is reclaiming yourself. Have you ever been loyal to someone who gave you conditions instead of love? Have you ever stayed quiet because you were afraid to lose comfort? If this story resonated, comment SELF respect and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Because some lessons are too important to endure silently.